midnight screams.
They say the Appalachians are older than trees, that the rock that formed them has been around for 500 million years. In that time, something unnatural has evolved there to be the perfect predator. At least that's my theory. There was never an official investigation launched. I won't mention the name of the company. I signed 6 different types of NDAs. What I can say is, despite everything being state-of-the-art, and the company being relatively brand new, all branding, references, and imagery for the company I worked for when it happened no longer exists. I mean, I'm sure I could find it if I scrubbed deep enough, but from what I gathered, they now exist as a completely different entity. It scares me to think what they may be unearthing still. When I arrived, it was 2022. I had recently gotten my master's degree in robotics from Northeastern. My recruitment was by chance. My thesis matched the exact project they were working on. Thermal insulation strategies for sustained robotic functionality in sub-zero environments. I made it sound as pretentious as possible. Hey, it worked. About a week after presenting and defending my thesis, I got an email for a job offer. The whole process was unassuming. Interviews, conversations, everything totally normal. My job was going to be working on different insulation methods for ambulatory robotics. Think Boston Dynamics, 4-legged machines. I was stoked to find a job in my field so quickly. I didn't even care the location stated was a remote ridge in the Smoky Mountains. I signed on immediately. When they said remote, boy, they meant it. No roads led to the facility. The only way in or out was by helipad, although I did see snowmobile patrol a handful of times. I didn't think much of it at the time. We were going to be working on pretty advanced stuff, and pretty much everybody assumed it was for military application. As such, we kept our mouths shut and kept at work. The team's main job was to keep our robots operational in the winter snow, without lockup or freezing of the joints. We had made pretty good progress in the time I was there. One night, we made a particularly big breakthrough with battery capacity. It was so big, in fact, we decided to celebrate the only way young, awkward robotics engineers knew how. Lots and lots of drinking. That was the night it happened. I'll give as many details as I can remember. My 3 buddies were drinking with me in my room. We'll call them Elliot, Josh, and Hassan. At this point, we had been friends for about a month and a half, and had gotten close fast, as we spent almost all day together as a group. Elliot and Josh were drinking much more heavily than either Hassan or I, and at some point in the night had dared each other to brave the cold outside for 5 minutes without a shirt on. Now, nobody ever went outside at night. We had barely any lighting, and on top of the cold and the dark, if you managed to stumble off the catwalk between buildings, there was a real risk of falling off a ledge or causing an avalanche. Upper management gave us all a big, clear fuck no for nighttime outdoor recreation. If you absolutely had to go outside, you were ordered to bring a walkie and a headlamp, which is how Elliot and Josh convinced us to go through with their wager. I remember knowing I couldn't convince them not to go through with it, but I could at least get them to wear a headlamp and bring a walkie just in case anything went wrong. They happily agreed to my concession and stripped down immediately. I badged us into the utility room and grabbed walkies and headlamps for all of us. We put the walkies to our own channel so the security staff wouldn't chew us out and got going. The plan was for Hassan and I to wait just outside the door and keep an eye on Elliot and Josh as they tried to outlast each other. Everyone agreed. We opened the door. It was unbelievably cold. I remember feeling like needles were hitting my exposed face. The wind chill was almost malicious. I could only imagine how the guys were feeling. Despite it all, they were smiling and laughing as they went further and further down the catwalk, taunting each other with every name you could think of. Hassan and I were laughing too, enjoying the absurdity of it all. That joy lasted about a minute before I saw Josh take his first step off the catwalk. As soon as he did it, I lost sight of his body, the lights from the path no longer illuminating him. All I saw was his headlamp moving further away into the snow. In the next second, I looked back to where Elliot was standing. It was just dark. I couldn't see him at all. Immediately, I radioed both. "Elliot? Josh? You guys all right?" Agonizing silence for what felt hours. All the while, both Hassan and I could see Josh's headlamp head further and further downhill away from us. Hassan and I looked at each other and simultaneously ran into the dark after them, screaming both of their names. The wind took our voices with it, and it seemed we were only whispering. We got to the spot where we lost him, and there was no sign of Elliot or his things anywhere. The only evidence of Josh was the trail his body had made in the snow, but his headlamp was becoming increasingly erratic and farther away. I radioed once more. "Josh, Elliot, stop fucking around. Let's go back in now." Again, nothing. Hassan looked at me with the fear of death. We both knew this wasn't a prank, and whatever was happening, we were now exposed to. I tried to comfort him with a hand on the shoulder, but told him sternly, "Get inside and get the CSO out here now. Tell him Josh got drunk and wandered off the mountain. I'll find Elliot." I pushed him towards the door, and he went running down the catwalk. I watched him go inside, and I was out there, alone. Everything after happened within the span of 5 minutes. I looked towards where the closest building was. It was the North Ridge, which I was told houses the extended staff that used the facility primarily in the springtime. It was empty at the moment, and hoped beyond hope that I'd find Elliot inside. I walked a couple steps over and badged in. I remember the door slammed behind me. I flipped on the lights, but the generator for this building barely gave the bulbs any luminance. It was like walking through a gray haze, and the brutal metal architecture made it feel all the more unnatural. I was starting to get really antsy, and I radioed for both of my friends. "Pick up." As I walked down and checked out every room for signs of Elliot, I kept the same radio call every 10 seconds or so. "Pick up." The routine pushed me on, through room after room. "Pick up." Again and again, until I heard anything. "Pick up." The walkie crackled in response. I jolted to attention, and from the other end, I heard, "Shh." I'll never forget the sound. A clear, human shush. Only us four had walkies at this time, on this channel. Elliot and Josh, as stupid as they could be, would never mess around this far. I waited, frozen in fear. Nearly crying now, I radioed again. "Pick up." Several moments of silence, and then, not out of the walkie, but in the building, I heard it once more. My head snapped to where I heard it from. Through a doorway and behind a table, I could barely see Elliot slumped down. Not hurt, but looking almost catatonic. As I took a step towards him, several things happened at once. First, Elliot screamed. Not a shrieking scream, but a despair-filled low scream from his stomach. As he did that, I saw the outline of a hand come from one end of the room and stretch to where he was. It was an impossible reach. I don't know how else to describe it. And time seemed to slow down as it crossed over the room. It enveloped Elliot's face, and it changed him. This part fucks me up the most. Everything else my brain can almost rationalize. But I saw my friend's features fold inward like a soft cloth. His eyes, nose, and mouth folded in and flattened into nothing, and then came back. I screamed. Primal, guttural, animal screams came out of me as I ran out of that building and back outside. I'm ashamed, but I never even turned to look back or thought for another second about helping Elliot after that. I still carry that weight with me. I bolted out of Northridge and onto the catwalk. To my surprise, there were maybe 10 fully equipped soldiers heading towards me with weapons drawn. 2 of them grabbed me, while the others proceeded into the building. As I was being taken away, I listened for gunfire. There wasn't any the rest of the night. They never found Elliot. At least, that's what they told me. They said that they found Josh's frozen body huddled in the snow several hundred yards down the mountain. His headlamp was still on, and he didn't have his walkie on him. Of course, they questioned me about everything that happened, but strangely, my interviewers didn't act incredulous when I told them about the shush, or the hand, or Elliot's face. They simply nodded and wrote it down, and asked for more details. They didn't ask me to talk to the cops, just to sign an NDA so that the company would not be linked to any of the alleged circumstances that occurred that night. That got me thinking of so many more questions. Why would this not become an immediate investigation? How were 10 uniformed soldiers immediately there within 5 minutes when this was a remote scientific facility? What was the real purpose of the Northridge building? And come to think of it, how did my badge even work to get in? There's so much more I wish I could tell you all that I feel would link some loose ends together, but my hands are tied, and quite frankly, I like to forget most of it. I still do robotics work in the Northeast, but I will never go anywhere near those mountains again. I suggest you don't either. If you ever end up in the mountains after sundown, be careful, be respectful, and most importantly, don't touch the skulls. The first time someone told me that, I thought they were strange, superstitious folk. I just moved to a little town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, looking for a new start away from the busy cities I lived in for all of my life. A house with a forest for a backyard and neighbors a mile or so away sounded perfect at the time. It's what led me to buying the property in the first place. Now, I think I regret that decision. Don't get me wrong, the house is nice. It has a few problems, like a creaking porch, and the kitchen is a bit too small for my liking. But it's cute. Quaint is what the realtor kept saying when she showed me the rooms, and I agreed with her. Even if it is a little small, the real selling point was the acres of forest that would be considered mine. I remember my first trip to the town at the base of the mountain, a small place where everyone knows each other. Naturally, some weren't sure about me, but most were actually nice. Asking where I grew up, what I did for work, normal questions, until the owner of the only grocery store in town, Mr. Faraday, asked me if I planned on hiking in the forest. Well, yes, of course. I think I laughed as he bagged up my groceries, eyeing me the entire time. Of course, silly question, he agreed as he handed me the bags, then continued. The forest is perfectly safe during the day. Just get home once the sun starts setting. You're asking for trouble with the wildlife, or you'll get lost if it gets too dark. Anything in particular I should worry about? We get black bears sometimes. Yell at them though, and they'll run usually. Scaredy cats. The lot of them unless you find a mama. Moose, foxes, wild boars, wolves. I paused in gathering up my bags and repeated, wolves? I thought wolves were extinct here in the Rectionus, Appalachians. Mr. Faraday shrugged and ignored my question, continuing like I hadn't said anything. Be careful out there. Always take water. Be respectful. Don't be one of them city folk that make a mess of the place. See a flower and think it's pretty, you take a picture and leave it alone. Easy enough? Anything else I should do? I wanted to be nice and not just blow the guy off, even if most of his advice was common sense. Then again, I didn't doubt there had been trouble in the past with some outsiders. It happened all the time in the parks I would go to as a kid, jerks that would come through and leave beer cans or cigarette butts everywhere. He met my eyes, staring for a second too soon before he replied, If you see skulls or bones, don't touch them. If they are in the way, you go around them. I stared back, feeling uneasy, as he suddenly smiled and said, You come back soon, you hear? I run specials every week on fresh produce and meat. I should have listened better to him. The first few times I ventured into the forest, it was always in the late morning. There's an old trail behind the house, overgrown but still usable, and use it I did. The forest is beautiful. There are all kinds of songbirds and small animals and interesting plant life to see. I tried going in the morning when it wasn't too hot. I made sure to bring water and wore good hiking boots whenever I had time for a walk before work. There is a point in the trail where it branches off in two directions, and that is the point where I turned back around. The last thing I wanted was to choose the wrong path and end up hopelessly lost or unable to find my way back. Then work changed my schedule, so I started going in the late afternoon. I stayed out longer, just getting done with my hike as the sky was bathed in pinks and oranges, the sun no longer visible but giving just enough light. I never noticed anything different between the morning and late afternoon hikes, other than less birds singing. Then, small things began to happen, little oddities that were easy to write off. Trees that had long scratches down their trunks, the psalm birds quieting down at the start of my afternoon hikes rather than towards the end. I figured it was from the seasons changing, the nights getting longer and days shortening. I had to be quick about my daily routine, only letting myself get maybe a mile into the forest before turning around. Even if I didn't believe the townsfolk that had gotten more vocal about being mindful of myself in the woods, I still didn't want to get lost. Then, I came across a deer skull. It was in the middle of the path back to my house, bleached and cracked, looking far too old. I looked around the trees to see if anyone was around, because it hadn't been there on my way up the mountain. I even called out a nervous, "Hello?" and got nothing. The idea of leaving it where I constantly treaded made me sick, so I grabbed a stick and carefully put it through one of the eye sockets. I took a breath, then tossed it off into the trees, watching as it hit the ground before dropping the stick and quickly making my way back home. That's when the howling started. It woke me up in the dead of night. A long, lone howl off in the distance. I was confused, startled, because until that point, I had never heard a wolf howl before that wasn't on TV. I didn't even know if that's what it was. I laid there for a while, listening to it, then turn on some music to drown it out and go back to sleep. For a week, I would wake up in a cold sweat and the wolf would be singing away until I finally started going to sleep with music. I asked about it the next time I went into town, curious if anyone else heard it. Nobody did. Mr. Faraday shook his head and said he hadn't heard any noise as he gave me change for my groceries. The pharmacist told me it was probably just a lonely or hurt animal when I was looking for some sleep aid. Even the waitress at the diner shrugged and said, "Haven't heard a thing, honey. Just make sure to keep your doors locked. Always better to be safe than sorry." The next time I went into the forest, I made sure it was right after work so I could enjoy a nice long stroll. The trees with the scratches were closer to my home, but I shrugged it off, figuring it was a bear or a moose. I did my usual circuit, followed the trail until I got to where it branches off and took a minor break, sitting on a fallen tree to drink some water. As I got up to start my way down, I noticed that the forest had become quiet. I felt nervous, glancing around to look for a reason like a bear stalking about, but found nothing. At that point, I quickly headed back home and nearly tripped over another skull. A moose skull, going off the huge antlers still attached to the white bone, perfectly preserved and staring in my direction. I looked around, wanting to find who was messing with me, but I couldn't see anything but trees and lush ferns. I thought about picking it up and throwing it to the side, but I took a breath and walked around it, then began running back home. It appeared 2 more times before I had enough. On the 3rd time, I picked it up and threw it into the trees. I didn't stay to watch where it landed, and the moment I got home, I slammed the door and locked up everything. I was shaking, trembling in my kitchen after locking the back door and dared to look out of the window. I didn't see anything, but I felt like something was watching me. A howl didn't wake me up that night. The sound of my porch creaking did. The groaning of wood had my eyes snapping open as my heart leapt into my throat. I laid in bed, unable to move, when I heard a low growl near my window. The curtain was drawn so I couldn't see outside, but I could hear whatever it was. The sound was that of an animal, but something didn't quite sound right. I tried putting my finger on it when the growling stopped for a second. Then a howl rattled my windows and my bones. I rushed to my bathroom, the only place in the house that had no windows, and slammed the door shut, curling up in the bathtub. I didn't move until my alarm rang at 7, and the sun was shining through the curtains. It kept happening. Every night, the porch would creak, the growling would begin, then finally the howls that lasted until the sun came up. I had enough by the 4th or 5th night and drove back to town, functioning on a cocktail of adrenaline, fear, and caffeine. I had to wait for the store to open, but the moment it did, I sought out Mr. Faraday, who was stocking some items on the shelves. He glanced at me, then said, "You look like shit. If you need help sleeping, you should see the doctor. Something keeps showing up at my house. I think it's that wolf I was telling you about." He froze, a slight tremor in his fingers before he turned, calling, "Sarah, mind the front. I'll be back." He didn't wait for a reply, and instead headed to the back of the store, motioning for me to come along. I did so, following him through a door that led outside. Once out in the too sunny morning, he lit a cigarette, then sighed, "I told you to mind the bones." I broke down at that point, lack of sleep, leaving me without a filter. It kept showing up. I ignored it the first time, and it kept getting in my way. What was it? A moose skull. There was another skull 2 weeks ago. It was a deer, but I moved that with a stick. A shake of the head still counts, son. What happened after you moved the deer? I admit it, that's when the howling first started, but it was far off in the distance, easy to ignore. Something that had him frowning but not interrupting until I finally asked, "It's not a wolf, is it?" "Mister." Faraday looked at me for a long time, then stubbed out the cigarette before reaching for another one. "I told you what not to do, and yet you did it. Now you've got a mess to deal with." I opened my mouth, so ready to demand he answer my question, but he kept going. "Now listen here, and you listen. You're going to buy some meat, the reddest, bloodiest meat I have, then go home and put it in the fridge. When the sun is setting, you're going to go into that forest with the meat and put it on the path. The minute you do that, you turn tail and run home. You don't look back. No matter what sounds you hear or feeling you get, you run and lock up tight. And it'll just go away. Just like that?" I asked, feeling a tiny bit hopeful. The next words dashed those hopes away. "Nothing is guaranteed, son. This is you trying to make amends. It doesn't mean you'll be forgiven." Anger boiled in me, and I snapped at him. "I didn't even do anything." He shook his head with a small frown and said, "You show disrespect and acknowledge them. That's enough in a place like this." I opened my mouth, but he brushed past me and asked, "You gonna buy the meat or what?" I ended up doing so. I didn't know what else to do, and figured, why not just go along with it? I couldn't explain anything else, so why not try to make amends? I bought the bloodiest steaks I could, and drove back home in a daze. I set an alarm to ring just before sundown and crashed on my couch until then. It was surreal, walking out to the trail as the sun began its descent. I noticed that more and more trees had the strange scratches on them, and shuddered at the idea of something or many somethings being so close to the house. I walked about 10 minutes up the path before laying out the steaks. It was disgusting, the blood collecting on the brown butcher paper, but I piled them up, then looked around. I couldn't see anything, just the usual trees, and decided to head back home. I took a handful of steps when I heard it, a low growling from behind me that had the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Heavy thumping followed the growling, getting closer and closer and breaking me out of my stupor. I got my feet moving again and headed back to the house as the sound of teeth ripping into raw meat met my ears. Once I was at the end of the path, my home in sight, I dared to turn my head before I ran back to the house, scrambling up the porch and barely slamming the door shut in time. It had been right behind me, following like an obedient dog, only it wasn't a dog, not even a wolf. I had to brace myself against the door as it slammed into the wood, growling and grunting. I managed to lock it, just barely, before rushing to the front door to make sure I locked it as well. It nearly beat me. I hit the door just as it started to open and pushed my entire body weight against it. It was barely enough to keep it out as I flicked the lock. I stumbled back, shaking and panting, staring at the door as the growling began all over again. This time I followed it to the back porch and peered through the window. It walked on 4 legs, fingers sprayed out with long claws for nails, and covered in black fur in some places, pale human skin in others. As it walked, The back legs bend unnaturally and make a horrific snapping noise, the bones visible through the skin and twisting with every movement. The head is the most disturbing, a bloodied muzzle that stretches out too much for a wolf, eyes glowing red, and can open the mouth far too wide. The fangs are all black and red with blood, too long, too curved. When it closes its jaws, blood oozes out. I stared at it, and it stared at me, before the lips peeled back into a sort of demented smile. The growling stopped, and instead, a new sound started. A sharp, high-pitched laugh, human almost, filled the air. I shivered, ready to shut the curtains when I heard more laughter. I looked beyond it and froze at the sight of more pairs of red eyes out in the forest. The heckling grew in volume, echoing until it's all I heard. Even now I still hear it. I hid in the bathroom again, feeling like a child and praying that my doors and windows would hold. Once the sun came up and I mustered up enough courage to get to my car, I found dozens and dozens of skulls on my porch, all different shapes and sizes, some bleached white, others black with decay, some red and others laying in pools of blood. One of them was human. I wanted to run to the car, bulldoze through the bones, but instead I forced myself to carefully step over each and every one of them. Once I got back into town, I sought out Mr. Faraday. He listened quietly to my account, looking disappointed and annoyed by the time I was done, and said, "I told you not to look. Now you really made a mess, not just for you, but for everyone." My blood ran cold, and I asked, "What do you mean?" "Everyone heard them last night, son, 'cause of your fuck-up." He closed his eyes, then lit a cigarette, even though we stood in the paper goods aisle. "What if I just leave? Just go back where I came from?" He shook his head and flicked the ashes onto the ground, uncaring of where they ended up. "Then what? What do I do?" "You're going to clean up your mess. A hunting party is gathering at the diner at sundown. You better be there." I asked if he really thought they could be killed, if it was possible, and he waved his hand and said, "We've done it before, son. You're not the first one to not listen. You won't be the last. But you made the trouble. You better be ready to help get rid of it." I swallowed, hesitating, then dared to ask, "Do people not come back from hunting all the time? This time won't be any different. Sundown, son. Or we'll not just be hunting them, but you too. We're gathered at the diner, and I've been given a shotgun and a crash course in how to use it, shown how to load it, told what not to do and what to watch out for. According to Mr. Faraday, who was around for the last purge, the wolves of the Appalachians is what they call them. He's sticking close to me, he says. Having a buddy nearby is important. It's safer this way. The wolves like to drag people into the forest or decapitate their victims. They collect the skulls. The bullets I have are supposed to be special, blessed by the priest and bathed in holy water or something like that. I've never hunted before. That's why I'm leaving this account in case I don't come back. Hunting accidents happen all the time. That's what the townsfolk will say if anyone comes asking about me, or anyone that doesn't come back. The sun hasn't set yet, giving us time to prepare and the priest time to bless every bullet he can, but we can hear them already. The wolves are laughing again.